the Karlov Manor is just around the corner. We're gonna talk about some cards that you should know about before you jump into your first draft. So welcome everybody. My name's Alex. You might know me from my stream or from my podcast, Limited Level Ups. I make content to help people get better at Limited Magic. And today we're gonna go through some top commons and uncommons in this set to prepare you for your first drafts, as well as some cards that I think are just kind of fun. As we're talking about the new cards, we're gonna talk about some new mechanics as well, so you can get to know the set a little bit better. And the first mechanic I wanna talk about is the big one, kind of the headliner of the set, and that's Disguise. And you might know Disguise if you played with Morph before. We just had Cons of Tarkir on Arena, and that was a Morph format. This is a Disguise format, and just like Morphs, you can play a creature with Disguise face down as a 2/2 for 3 mana, but unlike Morphs, they have Ward 2, so no longer will your 3 mana 2/2 get killed by a simple shock. Now you have a little bit of protection. And the first group of cards I think is really important to talk about is this cycle of 10 gold cards we have at common that all have Disguise. And I say gold cards instead of like Fairy Snoop here, but it's not really gold if you squint just right, because you could put this in a white-blue deck, right? If you just cast it on turn 3 for its Disguise cost, you can flip it up for 1 blue next turn, and hey, you don't actually need black mana to cast this card. So all of these cards are very flexible in draft, right? Usually you don't want to take a gold card too early in the draft because that kind of limits your decisions, it locks you into that color pair. But taking these Disguise cards is actually pretty flexible because yeah, it's great if you can cast your Fairy Snoop in your blue-black deck, but it's also totally fine if you just want to put it in your blue-white deck. So they're very flexible picks, and they're all pretty good cards. All right, next up, we're gonna go color by color. I picked out a few commons and uncommons for each color that I think are strong cards that will pull you into their color early on the draft. I've also picked out a few cards that I think are pretty fun to build around. Starting with white, we've got Novice Inspector, and longtime players will know this as a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector. And Thraben Inspector was a great card back in its format. It's seen constructed play too, and it also introduces us to the Investigate mechanic, which is a pretty simple one. Creatures will have enter the battlefield effects that say investigate, or maybe you'll have a spell that says do something and investigate. And when you investigate, you make a clue token, which is an artifact token that you can pay 2 mana to sacrifice and draw a card. So just a 1 mana 1/2 that draws you a card later in the game, fantastic. But also has some artifact synergies if your deck cares about that, and Detective is an important creature type in this set. You'll see some Detective typal cards going around, and a 1-drop like Novice Inspector to start your game, perfect for that. Speaking of Detectives, which by the way is the blue-white archetype in the set, we've got Inside Source. And a little kind of cheat code for evaluating cards in Limited is any creature that makes 2 bodies and you're getting reasonable stats is going to be a pretty good creature. And Inside Source not only gives you a 1/1 plus a 2/2 for 3 mana, but also the ability to pump that 2/2 or your other detectives. The last white common I want to talk about is a pretty simple one, but a pretty powerful one. It's Makeshift Binding. And usually they print these kind of cards at uncommon, these enchantments that come in and exile a creature, but they shifted this one down to common for this set. And don't overlook that 2 life. That 2 life's going to matter in a lot of games. And an uncommon I want to call it that I think is really cool and really fun is Case of Pilfered Proof, which brings us to another mechanic, by the way, cases. These are enchantments that have the subtype case. And if you haven't seen these before, the way these work are when you play a case, that first ability at the top, that's always going to be there. As long as the case is on the battlefield, it's either going to be a static ability, maybe it's to enter the battlefield effect, and then you have to solve the mystery. This is a mystery set, of course. So to solve, it'll give you a condition, and if you've met that condition, the game checks on your end step. And if you did solve the case, you get the solved bonus at the bottom. And that bonus is going to stick around just like the top one for as long as you have the case on the battlefield. And in the case of Pilfer Proof, case, this is sort of a detective, but also a clue/token build around. So you want a lot of detectives, you want a lot of tokens, which are going to come in the form of clues, but also just small creature tokens. And you can really go off with this card in the right deck. Moving on to blue now, the first common I want to talk about is Cold Case Cracker. So you've got a 4 mana 3/3 flyer, which is passable stat lines, but that death trigger, when this dies, you make a clue token. Really nice, because when you play this on turn 4, your opponent's not really going to want to attack into it. And then if they go, okay, I don't want to attack into it, I don't want to give you a clue token, you then start attacking the back for 3 every turn, and eventually they're going to have to point a removal spell at this thing. So just a pretty good value creature all around. Then we've got Dramatic Accusation. I really like this design. We've seen these kind of blue tap a thing, they don't untap cards, and they've been kind of middling. You know, the problem with these cards generally is they don't get rid of abilities. Your opponent can have a passive ability on the battlefield, and this card doesn't deal with that, but that ability, blue, shuffle that card back into your opponent's deck, really solves that problem. So a pretty good blue removal spell. The last blue common I want to call out is Deduce. And Deduce isn't the kind of card that you're going to take early and then just play as many copies as you possibly can. I mean, some players will. It depends how much you like drawing cards. I can't stop you from putting as many Deduces as you want in your deck, but I want you to call this one out because it's a little unassuming, right? Looks fine, doesn't look that amazing, but 2 mana, to draw a card and then get another card later for another 2 mana. You're kind of banking that away in the clue. A really nice glue card if you care about spells, if you care about artifacts, or just if you just want a little bit of card advantage. And then a really sweet blue uncommon here is Living Conundrum. When I was looking at the full set, this is the card that the number one card that stuck out to me as, wow, that's sweet, I want to do this. I was just talking about people who like drawing a lot of cards, and if you really like drawing a lot of cards, you know you have to worry sometimes about just decking. Well, not a problem with Living Conundrum. Not only does this stop you from decking out if you've drawn a bunch of cards, but it also turns into a threat that is going to end the game very quickly. You can enable this by drawing a lot of cards, or maybe just a little bit of self-mill, right? Just dumping a bunch of cards from your library into your graveyard, getting to 0 as quickly as you can, and then turning this thing on. Moving on to black now, I think it would be a big injustice if there was a set with murder in its name that didn't reprint murder. This one's a classic, just a solid removal spell. You're never gonna be sad about that. Another black common I wanna call out that I think is gonna fly under the radar, I'm pretty sure this one's gonna be underrated for a while, is Toxic Analysis. So for a single black mana, you can give a creature Death Touch and lifelink. So at very worst, the creatures are gonna trade, you're gonna get a little bit of life. And if it was just that, I'd be like, okay, don't love the card, it's okay. But tacking on Investigate as well, that's a huge deal. Not only are you going to sometimes win combats, you attack your 3/4 into their 3/4, they block, you cast this, you gain 3, kill their thing, yours stays alive, but you also get to draw a card, make a token in the process. Really not a lot to hate about this card. And then some black uncommon. So Undercity Eliminator, a 5 mana 3/3 that comes in and just eats something, just exiles just straight up. Yes, you've got to sacrifice a creature or a token, but this set is just littered with tokens. There's gonna be some games, you're gonna have so many clues that you're just not gonna be able to crack them all. You really don't mind feeding it to the Undercity Eliminator here. Even if you only have 1 clue, this is just a great deal. If this comes in, you get a 3/3 and you get to exile something. And one other cool black uncommon to point out here is Presumed Dead. We see these kinds of cards in black from time to time. It's, pump your creature, then it comes back if it dies, but you also get to suspect it when it comes back. And this is a new mechanic. If a creature is suspected, that creature can't block and has menace. And one cool thing I want to point out about this card is it interacts very well with your disguise creatures, because you can put a disguise creature down for 3 mana, cast a Presumed Dead on it in combat, and then it comes back flipped up. So you're gonna get a big mana advantage, get your big creature back, and often win a combat. Jump into red now, a pretty simple one. Galvanize, 2 mana, deal 3. These are always really good, but Galvanize can even do more than that. Your 2 mana spell, sometimes gonna be able to kill a 5-drop or a 6-drop if you crack a clue. And then kind of a funny one here, Gearbane Orangutan. So you got a 3 mana 2/2 reach, but you can either have it come in and kill an artifact, which is either a clue, or there's quite a few artifact creatures in this set. So sometimes it just comes in and kills a creature. And if there's none of that going on, you can sacrifice one of your artifacts to put 2 counters on it. So you've got a 3 mana 4/4 reach. So pretty good deal on either modes. I really like this one. And now some red uncommons. Cornered Crook, very powerful card. Kind of like the Undercity Eliminator, actually. 5 mana 5/4, it's a little bit bigger. But if you sacrifice an artifact, you get to deal 3 to any target. So often it's gonna kill something, or you can send it at your opponent's face. Just a very powerful card. Anything that comes in, deals damage, kills something, a creature. Those kind of cards in Limited tend to be very powerful. And another case here, Case of the Burning Mask. So this is a 3 mana deal 3. And to solve this case, 3 or more sources you control have to have dealt damage, which isn't that hard. That counts creatures. It doesn't have to be a burn spell, but it could include a burn spell. You can burn an opponent's creature, attack with your 2 creatures, get to solve this case. And if you solve it, you exile the top 3 cards of your library and you can play one of them. So if you can jump through these hoops, which aren't that many hoops to jump through, you get a 3 mana deal 3, kill a creature, and then draw a card with some selection. A really powerful card. Closing this out here, we've got green. And green's first comment I want to talk about is Vitu-Ghazi Inspector. The reason I want to call this one out is it highlights another new mechanic. Evidence. You can think of collecting evidence sort of like a kicker cost, but instead of paying additional mana, you have to exile cards from your graveyard as a cost. And it cares about the mana cost of the cards you exiled. So for example, for Vitu-Ghazi Inspector here, it says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 6. So that means you exile cards from your graveyard whose mana value equals 6. You can exile 1 6-drop, 2 3-drops, 3 2-drops, doesn't matter. And when you do, this comes in with 2 counters and you gain 2 life. And you're gonna see a bunch of cards that care about evidence. For example, we've got Chalk outlined here, a pretty nice build around uncommon. Every time a creature leaves your graveyard, you make a 2/2 and you investigate. So a lot of value. If you're into value, if you like these value, draw a bunch of cards, know myself, getting a bunch of resources and play kind of decks, this is the mechanic for you, and Chalk outline's a really good build around for those decks. A few more green cards to call out here. Topiary Panther. So usually when we see land cyclers, the green one goes and gets a forest, the blue one goes and gets an island, but this one's different. This is actually the only land cycler in the set, and it just has basic land cycling. So you can go get any basic land, helps fix your mana, and the really cool thing, you might have pieced this together already, but in your decks that care about evidence, this is a 2-mana thing you can dump in the graveyard and have 6 mana value worth of evidence for doing whatever you want with it. So that's a nice little synergy there. And then one more card here at common that also helps fix your mana. If you're somebody who likes to draft these like multicolor green decks, 3, 4, 5 color decks, I think this is a pretty good set to do that. Green's got a lot of good fixing. But Nervous Gardener, you can just play it as a 2-mana 2/2 if you need to. But if you can wait a little bit, you can disguise it first, flip it up on turn 4, draws you a land of your choice. Really solid card. And that's all we've got. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you feel a little bit more prepared for your first draft or sealed events. Murders at Karlov Manor will be available on Arena on February 6th, but if you want to play it a little bit before that, your local game stores will be having events, pre-release events from February 2nd to February 4th. That'll do it. Happy drafting. We'll see you next time.